you think about, we're at the day and age where we should be figuring out how to do this better, you know what I mean,
Right,
and
versus
not
not doing it
abandoning
all.
recycling.
And especially at an educational site, right? Like it's part of education.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly. And
real
you
life
know, and
education.
it's interesting because so many kids, whether they're in high school or even college kids, that was kind of the one thing you grew up with. You know what I mean? Is recycling was the thing that you could do to help the environment. You know, at
Yeah,
least that was
yeah.
impressed upon us, and it's for the younger kids. And so they grew up. That's part of their just culture and upbringing. And so now to have it just go away, it's kind of weird.
Super. I agree.
But it is. There's so many things that aren't being recycled anyway. I mean, it's plastic. I was doing a presentation not too long ago about the dangers of plastics and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. Doing a little research, and there's only like 5 to 10% of all the plastics created in the world are recycled. Which is insane. You think about that. How much stuff now is in plastic?
Is it because of contamination of the materials? Because of those rings that are not
It can
removed?
be
Or
contamination, multiple types of plastic. In some cases, it's just frankly cheaper to make virgin plastic than it is to
right?
recycle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
It's
can
so
see
cheap to
that.
make.
Live?
We are live.
Okay.
YouTube isn't showing, but it says it's live, so we'll see.
YouTube is not visible. Okay.
It's not showing me the video stream, but it says it's connected and the data stream's connected and everything else tells me it's connected. So welcome. Welcome, viewers. We're here today with Jimmy Orth from the Jacksonville Riverkeepers. He's the executive director, and he's going to talk with us about conservation efforts in Jacksonville, the condition of the St. Johns River, what we can do to help, and how we can support environmental causes that keep our city the natural and beautiful city that we love. Most of us really like that it's a combination of an urban environment and a natural environment. And that second one is really important because we got a lot of the first. So Jimmy,
It's so serious.
well, it's
Welcome,
a serious,
Jimmy.
serious,
It is.
Serious topic.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. No. It just
So welcome. Thank you, Jimmy, for joining us on the show.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Maybe we can start by talking about how you got involved with the Riverkeepers. Maybe a little background into your personal history here in Jacksonville and how you got started with the Riverkeepers
Yeah,
Association.
absolutely. Well, it was interesting. What really got me involved in environmental issues is I think it was 1990. Okay, so I'm dating myself here. I was in college my senior year, and I was head over heels over this young woman, and she said, "Let's go to an Earth Day event." It was the 20th anniversary of Earth Day, and so I was like, I wasn't really into the environment.
Mhm.
Yeah, let's go. She wants to go, I'll go with her. Next thing you know, I graduate and I'm getting involved with a local Sierra Club and got really involved in environmental issues. And it became like a second job, although I wasn't getting paid for it because it was all volunteer.
right.
But then it was interesting because I had an ex-wife. One of the best things that happened in that relationship was she said, "Jimmy, you should go back to school and get a master's degree and look to pursue your passion. Do something in the environmental field." And so I ended up doing that. I graduated. There weren't a whole lot of paid environmental jobs in environmental advocacy, at least in Jacksonville. And I just lucked out. They just happened to be the St. John's Riverkeeper just happened to be looking to expand. They only had 2 staff members at the time. Wanted to hire a executive director, and I was fortunate enough to get it. And 20 years later, here I am.
How fascinating. So there are two things here that I find, well, actually, one thing, that it was women who led you onto the path,
Yeah,
right?
It was the same for me. It
Yeah.
was the same for me. I was the women who likened the environment are the nicer women.
And animals, right? But
Yeah.
also, what was your bachelor in?
Well, I was actually my undergraduate was in marketing and business.
Oh, okay.
And so
Well, that helps, right?
It does, because as the executive director, I'm not, I'm really responsible more for the business side of the organization, so to
Right,
speak.
yeah.
And so that did help. And then I got my master's in public administration. And
Okay.
so, looking to do something in, management or some type of role like that in a nonprofit, and preferably an environmental nonprofit. And I was fortunate because I grew up in Jacksonville.
That
So,
was my question.
yeah.
So you're native.
I am. And, you come back. I came back after my undergrad thinking I do not want to come back to the city, but I didn't have a job yet. And, I'm going to first first chance I get, I'm out of here, you know.
Right.
And I ended up sticking around, and I'm glad I did because I love Jacksonville and I love the river. Frankly, we grew up in later years. I grew up in the Mandarin area, and so we knew a lot of people that had docks that they would let us, you know, go and hang out on their dock and fish and swim and.
In
You know,
St. John's?
in the St. John's, yeah, and we'd water ski, and so you know, spend a lot
Me
of
too. I
time.
used to swim in the St.
So
John's. I don't
here's a
now,
question.
but
I
used
know
to.
it's kind of premature maybe in the timeline,
Yeah.
but is it safe to swim in the St. John's River?
You know, it's interesting. We get these questions all the time, like, is it safe to eat the fish? Is it safe to swim? And what I say is that, with precautions, yes.
Which is like no
With-
fresh cuts and open
Right,
wounds
exactly.
thing.
But you know, that's really any waterway
Right,
in the
any-
world
yeah,
now, almost.
yeah.
You know, unless it's
Well,
in
that's
some
not-
really remote area.
And that's not a result of pollution, which is a separate issue, but it's a result of natural things like flesh-eating bacteria is in any tropical environment. It's just if you've got warm and water, which people love, there's a certain amount of flesh-eating bacteria.
Right. And there's pollution issues too. I mean, the St. John's has them. You know, I mean, we've got, you know, fecal coliform bacteria problems, and mostly in the tributaries. We have nutrient
Is that
issues.
from people, or is that natural?
It's mostly people. Yeah, and that's so there are pollution problems, but I just tell people, like, you know, you don't want to ingest the water, but that's anywhere too. Nowadays,
Yeah.
there's pathogens, there's all kinds of different, you know, things that can make you sick in the water. And so that is just something that I always tell people, be careful, you know. And then, you know, we always tell people also, or if you see water that just doesn't look right, you know,
Right.
it's a green algae bloom on top of the water. Okay, you probably shouldn't be swimming in
Yeah,
an algae
right.
bloom, you know. So that I think there's different situations, you know. But I you know, I still would swim in the river, so I'm not, you know, I think it's still safe.
Do you swim? No.
I don't really, you know, there's just not an opportunity
effort,
really
right?
to go out. What's that?
It's an effort.
Yeah. And it's, you know, there's not like, you know, in the river, there's not places to go swimming. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
that's-
There's not like a,
I don't even swim in a pool anymore. If I go to people's house and there's a pool, I don't go in the pool. I just sit by it.
Well, I meant like there's not like like a beach, right, where you go, but you have to have a dock. So it's, again, private access. The landing, not the landing, the downtown landing, but those little for the kayaks by Haskell building and such.
Yeah.
They're more for like boats and kayaks, not really for people, right?
right,
Yeah, so it's
exactly.
not really like a person's access point to the river.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just don't think of the river as a place to go swim. You know what I mean? It's I
Yeah.
think people there is a perception that it's not safe, that it's unhealthy, and so you know, and a lot of people think just the color of it. You know, oh, it looks dirty, but that's a natural color actually. So you know, that's tannins in the water, just like the tea that we're drinking right here. You know, it's the tannins that.
From?
It's from all kinds of organic matter. It could be leaves. It could be, you know, pine needles. You know, things like that. That as they decay, they release the tannins, and those tannins create that really, I think, beautiful kind of, you know, tea-colored water in the
Right,
St.
right.
John's.
I don't mind it either. I refer to it the same tea. Of course, I like clear water too. Everybody finds it a fascination, just like clear diamonds. But we have the springs. And
Yeah,
if we can protect those as well, we'll still have them for hopefully forever. Those require protection also.
Exactly.
Every now and then, one of our former mayors bought a concrete plant because it's not considered environmental pollution to dump extra silt and sand from making concrete, but it still would have disrupted the Ichitutney. And if it wasn't for that, was that Missouri that did that? I don't recall.
I can't remember. Yeah, I know it. I remember some issue like that. But you brought up a good point, Bill. It's like, you know, I think something too that I always like to tell people with the springs is, you know, we think of these springs and groundwater and the St. John's as being all kind of separate hydrologic systems in a way, but there's actually over 100 springs that flow into the St. John's, and they provide about 30% of the freshwater flow of the river. So and that water from the springs is the groundwater that we drink. So about 90% of the drinking water in Florida comes from the Floridan aquifer,
That's some
which
of
is the
purest
source.
water on Earth,
Yeah,
right?
and that's the source of the springs, which, you know, obviously contributes to the flow of the St. John's.
What do you think about the theory that this is either this aquifer or a certain area where this aquifer lets out is the fountain of youth that Ponce de Leon was looking for?
Well, I'm sure there was a spring. You know, I mean, could you imagine that you're coming over from Europe and you see a spring for the first time, you know? And
Yeah.
I mean, it is. And of course, back then,
In the
that
jungle?
water was gin clear.
Yeah.
Now we are having problems with contamination in the springs with nitrates primarily. That now, like for instance, you go to Silver Springs. Silver Springs is one of the most famous springs in the world, and you go now and it's kind of got a little green tint to it. It's still clear, still beautiful, but back in the day, I mean, it was so clear.
So clear they called it silver.
Yeah, exactly.
So a clean color of springs would not be with a tint of green.
No,
It's more like blue.
it's
Clear.
it's really clear, like a glass
Like
of water.
crystal.
Yeah, exactly, because that's water that water is it filters down. There's called recharge areas. Where there's areas where it's the groundwater's close to the surface, and that water can filter down. It filters down through the limestone. That's the bedrock of Florida, and that cleanses that water. And then that's so it has to have this cycle of being replenished. And then, of course, we pump out so much that a lot of times we're pumping out more than that can be replenished quickly.
And Zephyr Hills is selling it, and Nestle, I think, has their straw in it too, and probably some other companies as well. These huge conglomerates get it. And I like the Facebook meme that I posted. I got it from a friend, of course, like most memes. I stole it. And it says, it's a picture of Itchitutney Springs and the tubes, and it goes, "This is us swimming in your drinking water."
Yeah, exactly. Well, people don't put that two and two a lot of times, and think about.
Yeah.
And that's what the big challenge in Florida is with all this growth and development. Everybody has to have water. And, that's the irony of Florida in some ways is that we're running out of drinking water and we're surrounded by water.
Right,
We're the source of drinking water, yeah.
So are we running out of drinking water?
Well, it's you're not going to run out per se. It's not going to
You
like
just have
go
to kind of regulate the consumption.
right.
The
But there's a
aquifer
healthy
does
water
drop.
levels that they have to maintain, and when those water levels drop to a certain point, then yes, it can be harmful. Not just for the environment too, because like I said, the St. John's and other surface water bodies depend on that water also for the health of those, of the health of the rivers and streams that it flows into.
So is the Riverkeeper, are you, I guess, involved with also the maintenance and preservation of the springs in the surrounding areas?
Well, in our organization, so we're a nonprofit, and we're an advocacy group for the river, and that includes advocating for the springs, advocating obviously for responsible use of groundwater, because it's all connected. And so it is it's part of the St. John's watershed, and the watershed is, just so you kind of put it in perspective too, is watershed's the land area where the water drains into, whether it's through the tributaries or off the land. And the St. John's watershed is about 9,000 square miles. So that's about 15% of the state. So it's massive. The river starts west of Vero Beach and flows 310 miles north. So it's a really big and very diverse watershed. Yeah.
Can you go uninterruptedly on a boat from Vero Beach or from here down and from?
You can, but it's challenging because it's not, in some areas there's no navigable channel, so there's not like channel markers to tell you where the channel is of the of the St. John's, and in some places there's like an area called Puzzle Lake, for instance, that they call it that because it's just a series of little small islands and lakes that the river flows through, and it's not clear where the river, the path of the river goes.
Right.
So it can be really challenging from a navigation standpoint.
Gotcha.
And in some areas, it's really shallow. I mean, there's areas in the headwaters of the St. John's where it's so narrow and shallow that we've seen cattle walking across the river in those places.
And of course, it's a dynamic system that can change heavily based on water rain in Florida, which of course is very intense and sudden, so those levels can go up and
I
down.
was just thinking it would be such a cool, I know it's not very environmental maybe, but maybe if there can be like an environmental river cruise on the St. John's.
Yeah.
It's like very pretty,
It's interesting, we used to do a 3-day cruise. We'd charter the river taxi, and we would take people from Jacksonville down to Sanford. And so what we would do is we would stay overnight in Palatka. There was a hotel that we'd stay in there one night, and then we would stay the second night in Astor, Florida. And
where is that?
Astor, it's
more west, I guess.
yeah, it's south of Lake George, if you know where. So yeah, it's it's a small little town.
Okay.
And those trips were so eye-opening for people because the river is really so different, and so it's so diverse. I mean, As you get south of Palatka, it's a totally different river. There's a lot of areas along the river that are natural and protected, frankly. Like along Lake George, you have Ocala National Forest, so the whole
Oh,
side,
it's
one side of
beautiful.
it, and then you have state forests, you have St. Johns River Water Management District lands, a lot of conservation lands, and that's one of the things that's honestly I think the beneficial for the St. Johns as compared to some other waterways. Is we actually do, at least upstream, have a lot of natural lands that help provide a buffer and protect the river.
And I think we've got a huge percentage that's both federally and state, so it's not even one or the other. Like if you got to Yellowstone, there's a lot of federally protected land because that's where a lot of this started. The federal protections began there, but here in Florida, there's both strong federal and state protections. So that's unique.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Can I ask about this? I'm just so fascinated.
It's still not enough.
Yeah.
Well, because
With all the growth, yeah.
Yeah, with all the growth.
If we could get people to stop, I feel like one of the big things would be getting people to stop planting sod, because the more people plant sod, the more you have to put in fertilizers and things, and people can say they want to use organic or better ones, but if you've got a certain amount of it out there, there's a certain amount of people who are going to go buy that Roundup Miracle Grow type stuff. And now you've got it inevitably making its way through the watershed system that he's talking about. And some percentage of it still gets into the waterway. Even though it's a great filter, it's not a good enough filter for 50 million people across the state dumping chemicals.
Are we 15?
No, 50 million. I don't know how many.
Well,
Really?
what's interesting, you made a good point, because I don't know if it's still the case. I would assume it still is, though, is that not that long ago, sod was the number one crop in Florida. So we grow more sod to sell to people to put on lawns.
And it's not native, right?
No, it's not native. And one of the things that we were talking about groundwater a minute ago, 50% of the water that we use is to irrigate lawns and ball fields and things like that. Yeah, so you think about that, and you were
Dumping
talking.
half our water on the
Yeah,
grass that
and
doesn't want to be
what's
here.
crazy is most of that. Some of it's reclaimed, so it's water that they treat, and then they don't treat it to drinking water standards, but they use it for reclaimed water, especially in new developments.
That's why it smells like sulfur.
Right, but you get a lot of this water like that we use, especially in older neighborhoods where we're not hooked up to reclaimed water. If you're watering your lawn, you're watering it with treated potable water. It's been treated to drinking water standards. So we're taking this water, pumping it out of the ground, we're treating it to drinking water standards, and then we're putting it on lawns.
Yeah, I keep hoping
This
most
is
of
so-
Africa never figures that out. I get a feeling they're going to be very mad, more so than they already deserve to be.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because one day I was looking, this was a few years back, I was looking at a sprinkler going, and I was thinking, what would somebody from Africa think if they came up here and we told them that water right there you see is pure,
Drinking.
it's drinkable, it's been treated, and they saw us putting it to just water sod.
That doesn't want to be here. The thing that keeps killing me is it's something that doesn't even want to be here.
Yeah.
Right.
We're just trying to convince it to be here by dumping half of our drinking water on it and pouring tons of chemicals that we poison
Exactly.
ourselves with for it.
And exactly, the chemicals that are not good for the environment that
Right.
wash off, and so it's a big problem. I think that's the thing, the challenge that we have in Florida is with our waterways is it's like a death by a thousand cuts. It's all the people that are moving here. Used to be back in the day, years ago, 50s and 60s and early 70s, you had point sources of pollution, which were pipes that were the biggest problem, dumping, directly discharging pollution. And then we cleaned up a lot of that, the discharge. But now it's all the stormwater runoff, all of the non-point sources of pollution that add up to be a big problem. Because now, it's interesting. I was doing, I guess about a few years ago, I was doing a little research on just historically some of the pollution problems in the river. I was looking up at these old newspaper articles. And about the late 1960s, we were in Jacksonville, we were dumping 15 million gallons of raw sewage into the river every day. They didn't have it was this is before JA. This is before
This was when I was swimming in the water, talking about how clean and great it
You
was.
were not swimming in the 60s.
No, but they were still doing it when I was growing up. I think in the 90s they still were doing this, right?
Well, we weren't doing it directly then, because what really cleaned it up was in 1972 with the Clean Water
Okay.
Act. That required the city and others to clean up their mess,
Okay, so
But
my
it
water
was,
clean.
but it was interesting because so then there was one of the newspaper articles that really just struck me was in about 1970, the Duval County Health Department issued a health advisory that if you swam in the river by the Main Street Bridge, you could contract up to 23 communicable diseases. I mean, that's how polluted it was.
Wow.
And our governor at the time said that, if you fall into the St. John's, I think it was Claude Kirk was the governor. If you fall into the St. John's, you're more likely to die from pollution than drowning because that's how bad it was. But then, you think about it, we had at that time in like 1970, there's about 1.5 million people that lived in the watershed of St. John's. Today, it's more like 6 million. So even though we've done better with some things like point sources, it's all of the impacts of all these people.
Is it 6 million homes or 6 million people?
People.
People, okay.
Yeah. So it's a lot of people that live in and around the river now, particularly in Northeast Florida.
So 6 million in the watershed area. Yeah, okay. That's.
So
I feel like we could support this growth if we could have some social changes. What sort of changes would you recommend individuals could make? We talked about not putting down St. Augustine grass. What other things do you think would be beneficial that people could do that would help us support the growth without environmental impact and reduce our impact?
Well, it's like anything. It's kind of like with climate change too. I mean, the solutions are there. We know how to do things. We know how to build more efficiently. We know how to build, energy efficient buildings. We know how to generate electricity using, more environmentally friendly means. The same thing goes in our houses. I mean, it's not that hard to conserve water, for instance. If we're talking about running out of drinking water, or the levels dropping too low in the aquifer. There's so many things we can do. One of them is obviously not using St. Augustine grass, but you think about how people they take it for granted. That water you turn on the tap, it's going to be there. It's relatively cheap, doesn't cost that much money.
Yeah, no.
I will admit I don't want to give up my 4 showers a day.
Well, this is the thing, and kind of my eye and I guess sensitivity to that numbed down since I've been here for 10 years now. But when I moved from Europe, and I lived in Zurich and Berlin before, so quite environmentally forward countries, Switzerland and Germany, and moving here and just like people like opening the tap, brushing the teeth, and the water stays running. Like it was just mind blowing.
I'm guilty of this.
Or opening the tap, washing the cup, and I forgot to do this. The water's still running. I'm like distracted for 3 minutes doing something else. The water is still running unnecessarily.
I'm definitely guilty of this. I don't want to
People
adjust
like
the
there, they
temperature
open
again.
it, wet the brush, close it, put the toothpaste, and then brush, and then only open the tap again when they need the water. And,
Right.
And the same with recycling. We just talked offline about this, that everything is just dumped in one container.
Right.
And there you have like 5 containers just for glass, like blue, clear, green, brown, And everybody, like across generations, is very aware. But I think because we talk about this with Bill frequently, and I like that the enforcement there, because you can't. It's not that you can, but it's much easier to motivate people by monetary punishment. For example, trash bags, not the recycling, but the trash bags cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And if
They
you
come
put
from
your
the
trash,
taxes on them.
right, it's a city tax.
They'll only pick up their trash bags.
Yeah, and if you put trash in
can't
some
put
other
trash
bag, it's like it's your trash. We don't need
Right.
So
And
the
so, of
bags
course,
mark that, and you've paid the tax on the bag. So
Right.
you're taxed on how much
and it's
trash you
not
throw.
cheap,
Right.
Like let's say 10 bags, like $20, for example, right? That's like you were like, okay, maybe I should recycle more before I toss.
Right.
And I think it's unfortunately that's the way that works, right?
I like that
Until
one. I like it a lot.
until it gets like through that kind of hard push, it gets sort of encoded in our mentality that we don't have to be pushed anymore, but that's a norm now,
Right.
They
But
also pay a lot for the bottles, the return on the bottles, which means there's all people who don't have jobs If you don't have money, they go pick up bottles, and you can earn a whole living picking up bottles because it's like 35, 50 cents for some of the bottles. They range.
They
Right,
use completely
right.
different plastic, also much harder plastic
Yeah.
that they,
So they use a higher grade.
Right.
They make it more recyclable, and when people are done with their drinks, it's a common culture in Berlin. You don't ever throw your recyclable bottles in the trash because you set them beside it because within an hour somebody's going to come take them.
Yeah.
So you just set them beside the trash, and then there's no recyclable things even in public trash for people walking down the street because the value of the return is high.
Right. Well, and I know in some European countries, they require manufacturers also to take back products and be responsible for the recycling of it.
Same.
And that also puts the onus on the manufacturing to do it in a way that makes the products more recyclable, and easier that they can use those
Yeah.
resources. And I think that's the thing in the United States is we don't like regulations, unfortunately. And so anytime people, they say it's an infringement on their freedoms and what they can, and that is challenging though, because like you said, I mean, we do have to put some regulations in place that provide those type of incentives for people to do better,
Yeah. I don't like regulation, but we have enough, and out of the regulations we're going to have, these are the ones I feel like we need.
Right.
I'm definitely against regulation in general, but these I think are essential.
Yeah, and I mean
Because
it can go too far, certainly regulations,
Yeah.
but I think there's it's like with our environment, the ways that we've actually cleaned up the waterways to a great extent, like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and major pieces of legislation like that. Industry didn't like it, and they've pushed back and fought it, but it's proven to have not only it cleaned up our waterways, but economic benefits. The cost to benefit ratio has been wildly in favor of some of these regulations. So there's regulations that work. There are some that are inefficient and don't work.
Right,
But I
right.
think in a lot of cases that's what we have to do. Is make sure that there's penalties for doing the wrong thing and there's incentives for doing the right thing.
Right. Can I tag on that?
Yeah.
So, can you elaborate more about the economical actually benefit of, especially imposing certain regulations on the industries that we observed in like St. John?
Well, like in some things, I mean, the ones that are much more easy to quantify are like, for instance, the Clean Air Act, because there's a health component to that, right? The more pollution in the air, there's going to be more health problems, more healthcare costs, and so it's a lot easier to quantify. Okay, if we have these regulations in place, it's going to save X number of lives. It's going to, prevent X number of people from going to the hospital, developing asthma, whatever it is. And so those benefits can, exceed the cost in the billions, So those type of things,
Are they projections, or they're actually like, okay, we had like 10 years, for example, of Clear Air Act in place, and they went back and they tracked, let's say, asthma cases, or it's just a projection that it will be.
I think
beneficial?
yeah. I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's based typically on like epidemiological, data and studies and information, and so they can project this is what's anticipated, to happen. So, but I think that's the thing is, a lot of things like regulations, they prove to end up being in our best interests, not economically, but also obviously from a health standpoint. Like with water quality issues, I mean, if back in the 70s, you could get all these diseases. There's a health risk, obviously, that was associated with exposure to the river, which I think has been minimized to a certain extent now. While we talked about there's still some health concerns.
Right, yeah.
But those also just the quality of life, the benefit it has to Jacksonville when people, have clean and access to clean water is a huge benefit to the community.
So I was thinking a lot of people call out companies, and I've taken it now for bad environmental policy, and I've taken it now to be a premise that all major organizations seem to fight environmental policy and causes. But I know that it can't be all businesses, like, for example, because our company likes regulation, because our view is that the business we're in, which is being able to change and adapt, means that when new things come in that you can adapt to, gives us a chance to do what we do. I'm thrilled when there's something, because it's a competitive market and everyone's going to have to do the same. So as long as we're all in the same thing, then regulation benefits me because I like to follow the rules. So what are there big businesses that you might be able to mention that are setting a good example for how to respond with this regulation that aren't just using lobbyists and special interest groups to stall efforts that we have to keep our environment
Locally or nationally?
either way. Most of these would probably be nationwide companies represented locally, but I'm thinking of big businesses. I know small ones, but do you know of any big businesses that are setting a good example?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We really need to do a better job shining a spotlight on those that are, because that's one thing you don't hear about much, locally. It's who is. It was interesting because we were doing a little research about a year ago. I'm part of the Jacksonville Climate Coalition, St. John's Riverkeepers, a member, and so we were researching, like for instance, companies locally, what their climate policies are. And it was really interesting to see how many, and particularly mostly especially the national or international companies, they all have really, aggressive climate goals to reduce carbon emissions. But you don't hear about that, And it's a little harder for smaller businesses, obviously, because they don't have the resources to commit to those type of things. But you pick out a major, Fortune 500 company, and they're pretty much have, have climate goals to reduce their carbon emission, whether it's Bank of America locally or Blue Cross Blue Shield has a program where they're trying to use a certain percentage of renewable energy to power their buildings. And so you just don't hear those stories that often, and we've also done the same thing years ago. We were looking at companies locally that are making efforts to save water, to conserve water. And one, for instance, at the time was Mid-America Apartment, which is a major national apartment company that operate different apartment complexes, and they were putting in they were putting in sensor using radar technology to track weather patterns, and their irrigation system would only turn on when they needed it. You know what I mean? As opposed to just on a regular schedule, it would look at what is the forecast. If it's forecast to rain, the system doesn't come on. And they were able to reduce, just by putting in a system like that, they were able to put in to reduce their water use significantly, Now they still use a lot because there's obviously a lot of common areas that still need to be irrigated. But, I was just impressed because you don't hear those stories that often.
That's right.
Yeah.
I hear frequently about greenwashing and companies that claim to do this.
Yeah.
They take these concepts and highly advertise what they're doing, but it's usually a drop in the bucket that they do while they're meanwhile deforesting with the left hand, or and so you mentioned Mid-America Apartments was one you said, and you said Compass Bank.
No, like Bank of America. All the major companies are going to have, that are located here or have offices here, are probably going to have pretty aggressive climate goals. Again, though, the question is, are they actually following through on those goals? Having goals is great, but it's about performance. It's about execution, and that's what you have to, really scrutinize more often. Is because we've heard it all with the ESG and all of this, and it sounds good on the surface. But are they really following through? And in a lot of cases, they're not. They're not meeting their goals, or they're not, the commitments. And I think it comes down to, as we know, businesses, especially publicly traded companies, their bottom line is to maximize shareholder profit. It's not about saving the environment, And if those two have to, if they are at odds with each other, they're going to choose what is profitable, and that's what often happens, unfortunately.
I theorize that BlackRock's software Aladdin has actually finally calculated that the same thing we've realized, that taking care of social causes does have economic benefit. We just have to work on it together. We have to pull it together and work on it together. And I think that's why BlackRock has tried to tell Disney and most of the people that they own substantial parts of, that they have to stop just claiming they're doing ESG. They say you got to actually, do something that has social good to use our services. And even the CEO said, quote unquote, "I'm still the same dickhead I used to be." That's what his
It's just
words, not mine.
profit.
It's just more profitable. And I think that hopefully, as we have more AI, more data points, we can start to change the culture from, I don't care what's going on, I just need to do this, to it's really important to have a gestalt, to have whatever you do be a component of the environment you're in.
Right. Now, that's a good point, Bill, because I think, when I was said, profit,
Economic.
shareholder profits,
Mhm.
the primary responsibility of these companies. I think what it is shifting. You're starting to see that they're recognizing there is there is an economic cost to continuing with the status quo. I mean, because we've seen it. We know in the projections, there was actually an economic study recently that I was reading about climate change, and we're talking about this shaving off several points of GDP a year if we continue on this pace. We're going to see less economic development and productivity. And we see it across the board on so many different things, and there is a cost to the status quo, and there's also opportunity. I think that's the thing. What a lot of companies are also realizing, that the writing is on the wall. We are shifting to an electrified, energy economy, and so there are these opportunities in renewables. We're seeing the cost of renewable energy just plummeting. The technological advances are rapidly progressing, and so there's also people that see the writing. They know what's coming, and they see that there's opportunity to make money too if they invest in the right things.
Yeah.
How close do you think we are to cost-effective solar?
It's cost effective now. Matter of fact, the cost has actually dropped below the cost of building a new coal-fired plant. So it's more
so
cost
on a
effective.
large scale,
Yeah.
not quite yet to the home scale, though, right?
Not necessarily home scale, because that's the challenge we have with the home scale. From my understanding, is that the payoff is still takes a long time, and most people aren't in their home for 15 years. So
Is it 15 years?
in some cases it varies. It depends on the size of your house, the orientation, all of that kind
And
of
the
stuff.
challenge is that 15 years later, you're going to need a different system. By the time that one can pay for itself, you probably need a different one in more like 5
Really?
to 10. The technology's moving so fast.
Right,
It's
but I
moving.
mean, if it's still working.
I mean, you can still use it, but there's things I think, and it might make economic sense to upgrade, frankly. Like, for instance, the battery storage technology is progressing incredibly, fast. And,
That's what I'm waiting on. I'm waiting on the
yeah.
battery storage to match. And then by the time I can do the battery storage, I expect to have a more reasonable solar panel. I'm not real thrilled with the fact that we're still using solar panels that haven't changed their technology since the 70s, and we've discovered so many things, but they're just not put into production.
Right, right. And you're seeing that, it's interesting, by the way. I was at we partnered with the library recently to bring Jeff Goodell to town. He's an author, best-selling author that just read a book last year called "The Heat Will Kill You First," and it's all about heat and how the problems associated with climate change. And he was at this talk. He was talking about how, a lot of cases too, that renewable energy and has become so politicized. And he said, well, you look though, one of our reddest states, Texas, they just recently were producing 70% of their electricity in the state from renewable energy, more than California. And so you see that even in a state like that is really conservative leadership, they recognize that this is the direction to go. It makes
I
sense.
think that's what happened to me and a lot of people. We become so conservative that we've come full circle. I consider myself
No, I'm on the outside.
Yeah, I'm so conservative that most people think I'm liberal, and because I want to preserve what we have, I want things to be maintained, and the party that would have attributed to that hasn't been supporting my side nor the other side, and so since those terms don't, I feel, fit anymore, they've become kind of obsolete.
Well, conservative is conservation, right? It's
Right,
conservative.
yeah.
That's right.
So,
I really want to protect what we have.
yeah.
I really don't want something to come in and radically change it. Right now, that means that the causes that are on the Democrat side, which is politically considered liberal, are more commonly supporting what I want. But I think that both parties have a serious problem that we don't have time to get into today. But
Right.
But my side is the environmental side always. I really love. I always appreciated Florida and Jacksonville, but as each decade that's gone on, I love it more. And that's because the people who are here are loving it, putting their love into it, and there's obvious effects from that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately what typically holds us up from taking the action that's necessary to protect our environment, our waterways, or take climate action is it's politics. It's like a good example with climate change. Exxon and the big fossil fuel companies, they did projections back in like 1980 And it's so interesting. You look at the graphs that they did that show the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It almost matches exactly what the models are telling us today. So they knew it in like 1980, and then the politician, then they weren't supported politically. I mean, they were able to influence politicians that basically continued to delay and delay and delay and take action. And now here we are scrambling, trying to catch up.
Yeah.
So
sad.
And it can change rapidly. But it was interesting because I think, I was listening to a podcast the other day, an interview with Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She's a marine biologist, but also a climate activist. And it was interesting because she was talking about climate change and how it's always kind of portrayed as all these sacrifices you're going to have to make. And she was saying, we need to reframe that and look at if we take action, what the opportunities are.
Yeah, right.
And one of them, she said, is are we really that happy with the status quo? You look at like polling that shows happiness levels in people in the United States, for instance, that are declining year after year. People have less friends. I mean, are those good?
Right.
Is that good? Are we really happy? And this is the kind of world we want to live in. And she was saying that there's so many opportunities to create possibly maybe a better world, where we're more united as a people working together for a common cause, trying to solve something. And of course, the outcomes, could be better for us.
I agree with that entirely. I see a part of human evolution has been, from my view, from my perspective and others, has been a process of protecting ourselves largely from one another. We've developed, like most animals, tools and mechanisms to fight one another, and as such, the biggest thing that we put our resources towards in every culture around the world, and especially in America, is military. And so part of me has always wished that we could more quickly and more smoothly reframe this threat and understand that our threat shouldn't be each other. Now that we have global communication and global travel, now that going to war means fighting your Facebook friends, we should cut it out and recognize that if we can work together, if we can stop inventing our own problems to kill each other over, then we could put those resources towards the real threat, which is an asteroid wiping out the planet, global warming making it unlivable, toxins that we created, or diseases that we were playing with wiping us out. We could focus on something that are threats that we couldn't eliminate simply by not worrying.
Right.
The problem of bothering one another is that's just a superfluous thing. We could just stop. We could just stop doing that.
Yeah.
And then we could apply all those resources, which we do need to apply, to environmental causes. The only way I ever see that happening, even in a fictional world, if I were writing a story, would be if we had a threat, a very real threat that forced us to do it, in which case I believe people would. We would absolutely fire all the nuclear missiles at the asteroid.
Right. Well, I think that's what, it's what I've always said in my work too with St. John's Riverkeeper, is it's hard sometimes when you're seeing progress, things are improving in terms of water quality. It's harder to get people motivated to preserve what we have or to, make things better than it is to react to a disaster, something, a major threat. A good example is when we've seen people get the most engaged, it's typically like when you have a massive algae bloom on the river, and they're like, oh my gosh, what's happening, and what do we need to do? We got to take action, instead of being diligent about trying to prevent that in the first place by keeping the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus out of the river that is the fuel for the algae. We are reactive to those type of problems. And the same thing with climate change. People for so long, we've dismissed what all the scientists are telling us is going to happen. And then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit, look, there's storms everywhere. There's the planet's going to hell. What happened? We need to do something.
I need an extra air conditioner.
Exactly. And so it's so interesting because we as humans, we're not really good at planning forward and trying to avoid those type of problems and situations. We tend to be more reactive.
Yeah, because it's not immediate, It's like, maybe it will touch me, maybe not. It's not in my backyard.
Someone else will do it.
Yeah, someone else. It's like, I'm sure there are people who are taking care of this.
Right. Well, and some of the things, if they're perceived as being far off or down the road, especially Americans, we're very short-term thinkers, and we're here for the immediate gratification, and and not really thinking long-term. It's like the same thing as consumers. We buy all this disposable stuff. In Europe, people are buying more stuff that's durable and that'll last, and you have more of a longer-term perspective. And that's part of the problem here is we're not always thinking long-term. We're thinking very short-term, and the same thing even our economic system. With the stock market and companies report quarterly. That's crazy, so that we're constantly reacting to this really short-term amount of data that really may not tell us a whole lot long-term about the health prospects of that company.
You're absolutely right. Quarter-to-quarter reporting just kills me.
Mm-hmm.
Just kills me. I feel like either do it monthly or annually, but quarter-to-quarter means you're making 4 times a year that everybody's going to start making horrible decisions in a scramble to appease shareholders again.
Right. And it's funny, we're getting off topic here, but I just thought it was hilarious looking at, I was looking at this page I watched or that I follow about stocks and stock analysis, and they were, everybody's on edge waiting for the NVIDIA results to come out, their quarterly report to come out today. So literally the entire stock market is on, waiting to see what happens.
If Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't a hit, if it has a problem, it's reported that it will tank the entire gaming industry.
Wow.
That's crazy,
Yeah, everybody's waiting, and it's a year out. That's a whole year out, and everybody's like, every little detail about this effect, because they've spent $2 billion on the game so far, and it's not even the last year.
Right.
They spent the GDP of Liberia on a game.
Liberia's GDP is $2 billion.
Somewhere in that range, yeah. The GDP of small countries in that range runs somewhere around $2 billion. Like whole countries produce $2 billion. Like $2 billion is a lot of money.
Well, and it's interesting, kind of tying it back to what we were talking about with the environment and climate or whatever. I mean, you've got people paying more attention to quarterly earnings from NVIDIA or what the Fed chairman's going to say that might indicate whether there's going to be a rate cut soon, than scientists telling us, waving red flags, saying, "Hey, y'all, there's a real problem here. We need to address." I mean, I saw a study, I guess it's about a year and a half or so ago, that they were looking at how many scientists that have acknowledged there's climate change. It's primarily caused by human activity, and in 99.1% of the peer-reviewed climate papers that were written, it was all consensus of the. So you think about such a small. We rarely on anything have that kind of scientific consensus, and yet there's still people want to debate. That this is happening. They pull out some obscure scientist or some shill for the fossil fuel industry, and then say, "Oh, look, well, there's a scientist over here that But we'll be waiting on bated breath to hear what the Fed chairman says, or to find out what NVIDIA does and whether it's going to cause the stock market to go up or down, off of one company's results.
Well, it's also, I think, like the whole debate. I mean, it's years old, but like climate change versus global warming, just the phrase we're allowed to use is ridiculous, right? It's like it's the intention behind. It's so clear.
Yeah.
Let's name things what they are versus.
Yeah.
Let's just
not have this Orwellian doublespeak. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, exactly. And
well, it's unfortunate that that's one of the challenges I think we just have in this country. We're talking about the polarization, but it's also the fact that you have these echo chambers, that where people can be a part of a Facebook group or whatever, some social media group, and they're literally just reinforcing each other in these, these misconceptions or
people
beliefs.
People did their own research.
Yeah, exactly. Or these in all the conspiracy theories and how they can spread so easily because people are not our media is the decline in mainstream media has been, I think there's major consequence to that because now we find that even with Riverkeeper. Now it's actually harder in some ways to reach people. You think with the internet and that it's easier. In some ways, it's harder because when I started doing this work, 20 years ago, if we were able to get the Times Union to do an article about some issue we were working on, get Folio and then maybe a couple news stations. Oh my gosh, we reached a really large section
Yeah.
of the population here. Now I think the subscription rate to the Times Union is just it's in the tens of that, like 10, 20,000
Tens of people.
Yeah,
There's
10 people. Robert across the street's one. He gets the paper. I saw it in front of his house. But so few people are reading the newspaper. So few people, especially local, so they don't know what's going on locally. And because if they do get the paper, it might be like New York Times and then you've got so few people that. Folio. Nobody reads Folio anymore, I don't think.
I don't take them with me. I read them when I'm up at Brew, and then I put it back. Recycle.
Right. And then the same with the TV, and so people are getting their information in so many different places now, and so much of that information is unreliable, as it's from unreliable sources, or they're watching podcasts of some person who knows nothing about the subject they're talking about, but they portray themselves as an expert.
I'm a fan of flat earthers. Because they bring up a valid point that I think is in line with exactly what you're talking about. Flat earthers say that the earth is flat because anytime you go to bring up the information that it's not, they bring up that you have to get that from somebody else, and they're like, show me, now do your own experiment, show me how you can prove this. And I'm like, well, the thing is I can't do that with electricity. I can't do that with a lot of things. I can do over time. Yeah, I can big elaborate experiment, but I've got to rely on things that I know that then worked with other things. I need to read a textbook, not perform every experiment it took to make the textbook.
Yeah.
And so we have to have some kind of consensus that we accept certain things because it works with everything else. And I agree with you that this is a great challenge, that we have now, because there's, everybody is saying, oh, well, I got information from over here and over there and over here, but there's no trustworthy source. Even people that I used to get the subscriptions in my newsfeed, like the New York Times, they're all out for me because every single one of them I've seen posting stories that are just so obviously one-sided that I'm like, you're advertising to me in your story, and I don't appreciate that from a journalist.
Yeah, and I think that I think one of the challenges we have too is just the distrust. In the media, obviously, there's some trust, and in some cases it's justified, and then there's also even this distrust in academics and scientists. We've seen, it used to be people really, we really valued the opinions of.
I don't trust them because the peer-reviewed papers have changed. I've read peer-reviewed papers my whole life, and in the last 10 years or so, they're not good anymore. They're flatly, obviously biased, and you can see why they're just trying to write what they want to write. Like people that created the superconducting material at room temperature and all of this type of stuff, they're just, maybe they'll get there, but they're publishing all these papers like they've done something they haven't. I'm not claiming they'll never get there. That's impossible. But they keep putting out these hype papers.
Right. Well, I think that's, and we used to trust teachers. We used to, and they're seeing this, look at the backlash against, university professors. And, I think it's gotten to the point where, I work with a lot of university professors because we're at Jacksonville University. That's where our offices are located. And I know none of those people, none of them, it's kind of interesting too, because a lot of scientists, they're super conservative in terms of being careful about making sure that any kind of, they're not going to say anything that's inflammatory or that they don't feel really confident that it's rooted in science. And so it's interesting that, we tend to act like somehow they're these political actors. And so many people I know, none of them is doing this for political reasons. They're doing it because they truly believe in academia and teaching youth and teaching these college kids. And so it's interesting how they've been vilified, or people like, even some of the, people in our government, in this deep state, this idea that there's all these people that are these nefarious actors, and I think that really plays into a lot of this stuff with policy too, because people distrust these folks and I've worked with a lot of government people too, and I can tell you most of them are not non-political. They really are just doing their jobs. And unfortunately, we've made everything polarized, and we're looking at everybody as the potential enemy, and that's also led to gridlock when we're trying to pass policy that'll address environmental issues or climate change, things like that. So it's tough, and how you break through that, I don't know.
I'm not sure either.
I wonder if, and I wonder and hope if it's a sign of a shift in the paradigm, in our global, in our collective mentality. Unless any transition, it's connected or associated with a crisis, with certain I'm not sure, with certain culmination, right? Concentration, condensation before it kind of breaks free into that new perspective, new way of seeing, acting, behaving, acting upon thoughts inside. So that's my hope.
Yeah.
I believe in that. And because otherwise it is true, it's one thing, observe it in one culture, one country, but when it's across the globe to a certain degree, to a certain scale, right? Then you think okay, that's not just this place.
We have seen similar things in other countries, different but similar.
Well, because we're so connected now, we're like you were saying, with global travel, with all the social media, the availability of just unlimited information on pretty much any subject. We're all so connected right now that it makes sense, and it's not a new thing. It's 20 years at least, right? The process of globalization.
Right.
So, anyway, I hope that's true. I hope my senses.
I think, I do too. We got to be hopeful, right? Because you certainly don't want to. You think that we're moving into an era that it's just going to get worse and worse, And I think it kind of comes back to that people react to crisis, and I think what unfortunately is going to happen is we're going to see more and more crisis as a result of climate change. We're seeing it. And now the thing is we know that climate change is causing a lot of these things. There's this attribution analysis that scientists are now getting better and better at, where they can literally tell a percentage of what was the likelihood that event was caused by climate change or was accelerated or exacerbated by climate change. So we know, we have the empirical data to show that there's a lot of these events. And I think what's going to happen too is as we have more of these calamities across the world, honestly, in some cases, that's when people come together. You see that when we have a hurricane and people pitch in and help their neighbors, and we're doing things. We're going to have, unfortunately, more opportunities to help each other.
Right, yeah.
And hopefully we all step up and we do start realizing that collectively we can solve these problems, but we can also adapt to them together as well.
Yeah,
maybe if anybody doesn't want to, we can work on spaceships to send them to another planet. If they don't like this one so much, they can.
I think there's some people doing that, Bill.
Yeah. I want to help them. I want whoever doesn't want to take care of this planet to enjoy a different one.
Yeah. To kind of,
they can leave me here.
Close. I'm looking at the time. To close and about stepping up. What the current initiatives or projects that the St. John's Riverkeeper are involved? Is it correct to say or is? It's a foundation, right? So
it's an organization, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That we as the citizens of Jacksonville can help with, support to, depending on.
Yeah. What's your message to spread today? What would you like to tell all the viewers?
Well, in terms of St. John's Riverkeeper, I think a lot of times one of the easiest ways to get involved, that kind of first step, is we do a lot of cleanups, for instance. And that's just a good way for people to get introduced to the work we're doing. And it's great because, you do something and there's that gratification of you can see the results of your work. Hey, look, I made a difference today. Yeah. So that's something in our website we list all of our cleanups.
When's the next one of those?
Oh gosh, you had to ask Bill. I don't. There's one coming up. I know soon. But check out the website on our event page. Okay. The other thing that I would just in general tell people, I think that is so important, is that have to get engaged in your community in decisions that are being made. And if maybe it's not the environment, but whatever it is, your concerns is you got to get involved. You got to make sure that your elected officials are hearing from you, that you're attending public meetings that when discussions are being happen or decisions are being made, and just voting. And for the people, make sure you vet these candidates and know where they stand on these issues, because that is literally, politics is what typically keeps us from doing the things we need to do, and I think we got to get the people. And when it comes to the environment, for instance, I always tell people that's the one thing you can do is vote for people that are going to actually put policies in place that are going to protect the river, they're going to address climate change, that is one of the most important things we can do, because they're the ones that are put in place to make these decisions, develop the policies, and they have to hear from us though. They have to be voted in, and then they have to
Right.
know where we stand
Have
and what
to
we want.
That's
check
right.
back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been amazed throughout my life. I have to agree that I am only coming into this in this age of my life. I thought that when I want to say something to a politician or whatever, it just goes into the waste bin and nobody listens. But I've seen where the changes that I've seen changes that came from things I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've thought, well, that can't be right, because I see things changing and I know that they were elicited because of things that I did. And I've seen it in companies, I've seen it in cities, and so I become I now have just started to I'd say learn more and become more involved myself. So I think it's great to encourage other people as well. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And another point you mentioned, like even in a company or business, same thing. People can speak up if you see something that's not being, your company isn't doing things that they could be doing from a more environmentally friendly way. Talk to your boss, talk to the manager and say, hey, why aren't we recycling, or whatever it is. I think there's ways too within our own that our voices can be heard, and join with get some of your other fellow employees to join together and say, hey, we really want this to happen. I think, that's the thing that unfortunately so many people have become jaded and feel like they can't make a difference. It's not even worth voting because it's not going to really matter.
Yeah.
All the politicians are the same. They're not all the same. I mean, yes, people typically, they have a big ego or something that they want to get into politics and be involved sometimes. But there are really good people in politics, or people that are running or that could run and that could make a real difference. And so I think it's just finding those people and making sure that we're voting for the right candidates, because there are differences, believe me,
Right.
Even on the national level. I tell people, here Biden is the same as Trump. No, they're not. Look at their records really closely, and you will see, not just on policy today, but what they want to do in the future. And you'll see there's a stark contrast, and you just got to decide which side do you want to be on. Instead of just, acting like they're just all the same, because they're really not.
And of course,
I feel like they're less so now. I feel like in our day and age, they're less the same. I feel like in the past they were more the same. But
Right.
now, I don't know if it's just that I'm more aware or the issues affect me more. I can't tell because there's two equations in that variable, and I'm one of them.
Right.
But I do feel like there's a bigger difference every year that goes by.
Yeah, and I think that just goes to the polarization. It seems like, people are retreating, getting farther and farther apart too. So they're kind of either moving farther to the left or moving farther to the right, and that just creates a much bigger divide.
Right.
That makes sense.
I wanted to say, as a non-profit organization, also, if you just have money you want to give.
We like money,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
It takes. We're 100% privately funded. So we rely on, we're membership-based groups. We rely on our members, donors, grants. So yes, absolutely.
Give money. Give some money to the St. John's.
and come out and see us. I believe we'll be at the next one. I'm pretty sure Alexandra will confirm on our schedule, but I'm not good with calendars, but I'm good at showing up. So yeah, check out the St. John's Riverkeeper. Look at their initiatives online and see what you can do to get involved. And thank you very much today.
Jimmy, thanks
Absolutely,
so much.
glad it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Likewise, yeah. Okay.
And we'll see you next week. Have a great one.
See ya.
Okay, bye. Thank you. No, that was good. I hope.